Everybody, thank you all for coming out today. We really do appreciate it. My name's Lloyd.
My name is Taylor Black.
And my name is Emily Stone.
And we're going to be talking about big evaluation techniques that you can employ for your small nonprofits today. We're going to go a little bit into some practical skills that you can use to increase the efficiency of your growing nonprofit, specifically focusing on a logic model and data collection methods that you can employ. And at the end, we're going to have some time for questions. So if you've got some questions, jot them down. We'll answer those at the end. First, before we jump into the practical side of things, I think it's really important for us to discuss why it's important that we evaluate our nonprofits. So let's look at a case study. If you can remember, back to 2010, a devastating earthquake hit the island of Haiti. Almost immediately, the Red Cross stepped in and started raising over $500 million in relief, trying to rebuild the infrastructure that was destroyed in Haiti. News came out a couple years later that said that a lot of the funds that were going towards the American Red Cross were misappropriated and were not going towards permanent housing, only resulting in something like 6 permanent homes and leaving thousands of Haitians in temporary housing. This is a failure of working towards the overall mission of what the American Red Cross was trying to do, and they failed to, they actually misled their donors a little bit because they thought that all those donations were going towards permanent infrastructure. A recent study published by the Colorado Trust says that most nonprofits conduct data collection, but they fail to produce valuable conclusions based off of the data they've collected. So when we think about program evaluation holistically, it's really important that we collect data and then use it in a practical way that increases the overall efficiency of our organization. And as members of the board, it's your responsibility to make sure that your organization is accomplishing its mission to the best of its ability. So before we define what program evaluation is, I think it's really helpful to talk about what it's not. A lot of times we hear the word program evaluation and we think it's data collection used to indicate to funders whether or not a program that we're providing is successful. But in actuality, program evaluation is an ongoing tool that allows organizational leaders and managers to determine how effective their organization is operating. A lot of times we think of program evaluation as costly external evaluations produced by auditors, but instead it can be external or internal, produced by auditors and managers on the inside of your own organization. A lot of times we think of program evaluation as top-down monitoring, but instead it's a collaboration at all levels of the organization to maximize the overall efficiency. The Bridgespan Group provides us with a really good working definition that I want to highlight, which says that program evaluation are periodic studies that nonprofits undertake to determine the effectiveness of a specific program or intervention and to answer critical questions about a program. I want to highlight 2 parts of this definition. First of all, it's periodic. So a lot of times we get into this idea that program evaluation should just happen every year or every 5 years. But actually, it should be ongoing. It should be something that your organization is leaning into constantly. And then also, it's focused on specific programs or interventions. So once again, there's this aspect of, are we working as effectively and efficiently as possible? And so your role as members of the board is to make sure that your organization is approaching that in the right way and setting the tone for staff at all levels. Now, let's not forget and let's not haze over some of the limitations that we might be experiencing as growing nonprofits. There's a lot of things that we have to keep in mind when it comes to program evaluation. So say you're on a board that's young and growing, and maybe some of the members on board may not understand what their role is as a board member. It's really important to understand that when it comes to program evaluation, the goals and the objectives of program evaluation are directly tied to your responsibilities as a member of the board. If you're sitting on a board, you have a responsibility to make sure that your board is acting as rationally as possible within the environment that it's working within, and to make sure that your organization is not drifting from its mission, but instead staying focused on whatever mission your organization is focused on. Program evaluation allows us to do both those things, stay focused and get a better understanding of the environment that we're working in. In a very practical sense, program evaluation, as small nonprofits, we're limited in the fact that we have limited money, time, and staff. We're going to talk a little bit about some very cost-effective and easy data collection methods that you can use to maximize the return on that. And finally, we have this question of, okay, once I've collected the data, how do I turn that into meaningful action? Our logic model is going to help you make that connection at all steps in your organization's program. Ultimately, though, as members of the board, we have to shift our focus from thinking of program evaluation as an obligation that we have, but instead as an opportunity to grow and to continue to pursue growth for our organization. There are countless benefits that we have. Just to highlight a few, it allows us to evaluate the performance of the executive director. Program evaluation also indicates how we can modify and change our programs to best serve the stakeholders and members of the community that we're reaching out to. It also allows us to design measurable objectives and share those achievables with staff. All this is to say that program evaluation is not something that we have to do, but it's something that we get to do. And it sets the stage for growth as small and growing nonprofits for the future. So I'm going to hand it over to Taylor so that she can talk to you a little bit about logic models.
Okay, so Ian explained a little bit about why it's important to evaluate your program as a nonprofit. I'm going to go into the specifics of how you can evaluate your programs. So I like to start with a logic model. So a logic model is basically a graphic representation of how you move from the resources that you put into your programs to the outcomes or goals that you want to come out of your programs. And so it's focusing on that flow of resources. So you have your resources or your inputs, and then you have the outputs or what you're producing, and then how those outputs generate change through the outcomes. Okay, so there's a lot of situations when you should use a logic model. Like Ian was saying, it should not just be when you're commencing a new program. It should also be an ongoing tool that you use to evaluate and reevaluate your already existing programs. So you can obviously use it to outline a new program that can help identify your community's needs. But you can also use it, for instance, to devise activities that you want to make sure that you include in your program. Or to illuminate what kind of data you want to collect in order to evaluate if you're actually accomplishing what you set out to accomplish. Okay, so in a few minutes we're going to be creating our own logic models. Before we do that, I want to go over some of the key terminology for what is included in your logic model. So, you start with a situation, which is basically what you're trying to solve with your program. So it can either be a problem that you want to address or a goal that you want to reach, just whatever your starting point is of your program. Then you move into your inputs, and so these are the resources that you're going to put into your program, such as the people that are involved, the location, the tools that you need, anything like that, the money. All of those are your inputs that are going into the program, which are basically just what you need in order to accomplish it. Then you have your outputs, and so these are the things that are generated from your program. Usually they're numerical, so these could be like the activities that you want to make sure you incorporate, the products that you're producing and how many you're making, the participation, so who is involved in your program. And then the outcomes are the results or how you expect the outputs to impact the community. And so these are usually your goals. So some people, you can kind of work backwards if you'd like and start with your outcomes or your goals that you hope your program accomplishes, and then see how you can get there through your inputs and outputs. So here's kind of like a visual representation of an actual logic model. So let's say, for instance, you're on the board of a nonprofit that wants to start a summer camp. And the goal of the summer camp is to improve academic performance for students over the summer. So if you were to make a logic model of this, your situation at the top would be, like I just said, to establish a summer camp that improves academic performance for kids over the summer. Then you would move into your inputs. And so your inputs are everything that you need to put into this program. It would be your program coordinators, your camp counselors, your program space, supplies, and also your evaluation materials so that you can hand out surveys and things during the summer camp. Then when you move on to activities, you want to make sure that your activities are actually helping you reach your ultimate outcome or goal. So in this situation, our ultimate outcome, one of them is to improve academic performance. And so in order to do that, first you need to start by actually recruiting participants. If you don't have anybody in your camp, then what's the point? So that's one of your activities. And then that leads directly to your participation. So if you do that well, if you have a good marketing scheme and everything like that to recruit participants, you will have participation. And then you move on to your short-term goals. So your short-term goals you want to directly relate to your long-term goals. So for instance, in this case, one of your short-term goals is to have enriching field trips, and another one is to have daily projects. So both of these things can contribute towards improved academic performance. If, for instance, one of your short-term goals was to have a kickball tournament every week, that wouldn't really help with improved academic performance, it would help with another goal. And so this is important in identifying what kind of gaps you have in your program and if you're actually accomplishing what you've set out to accomplish. Okay, so if you look at the very last page of your PowerPoint slides, there should be space in the bottom half for you to create your own logic model. Okay, we're finding that. It should have labels.
It looks like this page.
It's the very last page. Can you find it? Yeah. So we're going to take just a few minutes to create your own logic model for your organization. You should see labeled. It should have places for your situation, inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And you can refer up here on the slide if you need those definitions again. And then we're going to have a discussion after you all do this. So just take like 2 minutes. It can be for any program in your organization, one you want to start, one that already exists. But just kind of jot down a simple logic model on your paper.
Can you give any questions?
Yeah, if you have any questions, yeah.
And this doesn't have to be too specific, this can be just a general overview. Kind of take about 1 more minute.
So if everybody's starting to finish up, we'll just have a little discussion about what y'all found. So Did anybody determine any gaps in their programs or things that they might want to start implementing to accomplish their goal?
Well, Sally and I are both on the board of the Athens Area Homeless Shelter, so I don't know if you all are familiar with it, but it focuses on moms, single moms who have children who become homeless for whatever reason. So we thought trying to create an after-school program for the school-age children, because the preschool-age ones are in daycare during the day, but the older children come home and oftentimes they need tutoring, they need social time, they need snacks, and finding ways to give them that sort of structure in their afternoons up until, dinner and family time is something that we were brainstorming about.
Yeah, it's definitely a great idea. I think that's definitely a need in the community. I know I went to some after-school program, and I think that would be really helpful for a lot of kids. Yeah. Anybody else find anything else in their logic model? It could be, yes. Yes.
I'm on the board of the Morton Theater Corporation, and we're trying to increase our programming in general that we have in Morton. And one of the gaps we've identified is more educational programming or children's programming. And as our 110th anniversary comes up, we're trying to fill those gaps. And so, trying to identify like theater or musical talent, was one of the things that we're trying to do. And so the input would be the money to pay those people. Materials, volunteers, we already have a space, we already have a staff, and just the talent, that's like the major thing. Also just trying to make sure that in terms of the output that it's, we try to develop material that's Athens-based, so Athens African American history, as opposed to sort of this larger U.S. Black history or whatever. And then the participation would be from like 1st to 12th grade. And then just increased knowledge of Black history.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, so you can kind of go either way. You can start with your inputs and work towards what you want your outcome to be, or you can start with your outcome and see what kind of inputs you might need. Is there anything else? Okay, so another great benefit towards making a logic model is being able to identify what kind of things you want to evaluate. So what kind of data you may want to collect. So for instance, with the logic model I just showed you, you might want to collect data on how many campers are attending in order to evaluate if you're actually accomplishing what you want to accomplish and you're getting the people that you want. And so Emily's going to talk a little bit more about this actual data collection process.
Alright, so data collection. I know that data can sometimes be a scary word. What is it? What do you do with it? How do you find it? Where is it? Kind of a mystery to a lot of people, and I totally understand that. But I'm here to tell you that data collection is something that absolutely anyone can do, and it can have really amazing benefits for your organization. So we've just come from talking about logic models, so you've got these great ideas, you know where you want to focus your energy in your organization, how do you want to improve things, and data is a really awesome way to take those great ideas that you have and create strong outcomes. So this is where you get into the nitty-gritty of, all right, so we know that we want to improve educational outcomes with this summer camp, but how are we going to get there, and how are we going to know once we've gotten there? So looking back at our example, how do you think that our simple organization of working with youth in the summer camp, what kind of data might they collect? Any ideas? It can be absolutely anything.
Is this for like the planning process or after the camps happen?
It could be at any point. So let's say hypothetically it's in the planning process for the camp.
Sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead. I was just going to say data on maybe what the kids are interested in and what education or other things they might do.
Definitely. So you could structure your programming to make sure it's most effective in engaging with the kids so that you know their interests beforehand. That's a great idea.
I was going to say assess the need for such a program to see if there's even any other groups that are doing that same thing. Maybe instead of doing it on your own, you can partner with another organization.
Yes, partnerships are always amazing. You don't want to duplicate services if it's not necessary, especially when we're already working with such good resources. Does anyone else want to add something?
Demographics. Where are you drawing these campers from?
Demographics are a huge thing, and we will go more into that. These are some great ideas. Anyone else last comment? Yeah.
The ratio of counselors to campers.
Very important. You don't want to have 20 kids with this one young counselor who's never worked before, I think I would personally be overwhelmed. So making sure you understand all of that before you get into these situations helps avoid problems like that. All right, so what data matters? There's a lot of different types of data. So when we're looking at organizations, you decide for yourself when looking at what you want to affect in your organization, the type of data you'd like to collect to impact that. So there's qualitative and quantitative data, and both are important. So when we're talking about qualitative data, qualitative is descriptive data, it describes qualities, it really describes the situation that you're in, and it might not be numerical. Quantitative, meanwhile, is numerical data, so that means it's something that can be easily summarized. You can create a graph from it, show it to people. It looks really impressive when you can work magic with numbers. But both of these are really important, and it's up to you to decide which kind of data you think is most going to reflect the issues that you're facing in your organization. All right, so how do you properly collect data? A really easy way to collect data is to monitor activity. So that might be something like how many people do you serve? Going back to the camp counselor issue and that situation, it might be how many counselors do we have from one year to the next. That's something that's really easy to access. You probably already have records like that. It's a nice number to be able to show from year to year how your camp might be growing. Something like how many volunteers do you recruit? Something like the key demographics, like we talked about earlier. It's nice to know the people who are interacting with your organization, where they come from, what kind of characteristics they have. Always really good to know that you're representing the community as much as you can. Things like specific programs that people choose to attend. Say you had 2 sessions of camp, and one was in July and one was in August. And the July one fills up within a week of releasing the registration, and no one ever comes to the August ones. Maybe in looking at data like that, you would realize that August is a really busy month for people, so it might not make sense to have a program during that time. So understanding the difference in how programs are received by the public might help you understand what people expect and want from your programs. And then also things like website data. I know that nonprofits are entering this digital age. You have a website, and that's a place where people receive information about your nonprofit. There's a lot of great free tools out there that you can use to understand how people interact with your website and how they get information from it. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So there's different ways to collect data. Passive data collection is something that you already have. This is data that exists within your organization, so you don't need to work too hard to find it. You already have it. So that could be something like website data. If anyone's ever heard of Google Analytics, this is free training, absolutely anyone can access. It's a really great way to understand the way people interact with your website, especially if your website is something that people use to gain information, if it's something that you use to connect with clients or volunteers. It would be a really good tool to make sure that there aren't any barriers for people accessing that information. So Google Analytics I would recommend as free training if you have the time and the availability to delve into what your website offers the community. Event information, another really good thing that you already have access to. You've planned these events before, you have access to the reports on how they went, so making sure that you use that information in planning future events is a really good way to make sure that you're always progressing and doing better for your year. Information about donors and volunteers, this could be stored in contact applications and forms. You already have this, and the same with things like financial documents. These are reports that you already have, so making sure that you recognize these things as data that you can use to better your organization, and that this data already exists for you. You already got it, you can start right here, you don't need to take any extra steps to go out there. The other type of data collection is active data collection. So these are things that you would need to take extra steps to go forward and collect for yourself. But they can have really amazing benefits if you're trying to target a specific issue within your program and to understand how that issue is being addressed. So things like surveys or intake forms, we'll delve into an example of an intake form in a little bit, but these are really amazing ways of collecting information about the people who interact with your organization. So this could be something like the volunteers who work with your organization, it could be something about stakeholders and how they've engaged with your organization, or even the clients that you serve. Interviews, focus groups, and observations are also really great ways to understand the interactions that people have with your organization and make sure that they're always positive and always as effective as possible. So, intake form. Who here has ever been to the doctor's office? Raise your hand. Awesome, so glad to see your hand. I feel like it's probably important that you've been to the doctor's office once or twice. If you have been to the doctor's office, it means that you have probably filled out an intake form. But I would like to say that intake forms are something that are a really great tool far beyond the healthcare industry. They're something that you can use with different people that you interact with. So up here and also in your packets, we have an example of a volunteer intake form. So at the top, you can see the collected data, basic data like name, date of birth, different contact information. But further down, you get into some really interesting questions. So are they working somewhere, their highest level of education, what are their interests, how do they hear about your organization? And understanding this kind of data, you can maybe understand how you're recruiting people and how people are perceiving your organization. So say you had an intake form for all of your campers, and you noticed that you were getting a lot of campers that were living in these certain school districts. And from that, you might pick up that camp counselor, or that counselors in the schools were promoting your camp to their students. And then you can maybe forge better relationships with schools, widen your demographics, make sure that you're reaching all of the community. I think that data offers a really interesting look at the way that people interact with our organizations, and in noticing trends in data, you can really grow your organization to do so much more. All right, so one of the last things I want to leave you with is that data is not meant to just be collected, it is meant to be used. So putting data use is really important. You don't want to just do it to say that you did it and check off a box. So in noticing data and really internalizing and analyzing the data that you've collected, you can notice really important trends within your organization. So it might be an issue as far as, are we being representative of the community and our volunteers and the people that come to our programs? Are the clients that we intake staying with us? Maybe why aren't they staying with us? Are they coming back from year to year? And then how do clients and volunteers experience our organization? What is their relationship with us like? I think that data offers some really valuable insight into answering all of these types of questions. So some takeaways we want you to have gained from this whole presentation. The first is program evaluation is a really important part of nonprofit work, and it's also specifically important for your role as a board member on a nonprofit. Second, logic models are a great tool for understanding program inputs and how those relate to the outcomes. We want to make sure that working with limited resources, that everything that you put into your organization results in the outcomes that you're trying to see in the community. And then finally, data collection is a really valuable tool for understanding how nonprofits can evaluate their effectiveness and how their programs are working at achieving those goals that you've already set. So that concludes our presentation. If you have any questions, please let us know. Thank you.